Well, good evening. Good evening, everybody. According to YouTube, that's me and somebody else. seems to never get off to a big start. So how are you, whoever you are? And hopefully we'll have some people wander in. This was kind of, again, a last minute impromptu thing because I have been very busy. Oh, Bob Casey. Hey, how you doing, Bob? Good to see you. You know, this YouTube is really screwing up. I mean, I look over at the feed, it says 1 watching, and then it said 2 watching, then it said 3 watching, then it said nobody watching, then it's back to 1. Jumping all over the place, so it's really hard to tell. Really hard to tell if I got anybody or not. Right now, I know there's 3 watching: you, me, and Joe C, Bob, and me, and the thing still says 1. At any rate, the mysteries of YouTube. Hope everybody can hear me okay, and if you can't, or if there's something wrong with anything, let me know if you would. Joe, how you doing? Joe C, good to see you. So that little intro I was playing was something I just kind of, I was getting the light kit installed in the thing last night, and it was dark, and it was flashing away, and it looked really big time. So I took out my cell phone and just recorded that little video of it. But I know I've done a lot of the building on this thing in the, you hear some static. Bob Casey says loud and clear. Let me know if you hear some static, Bob. Let me put my headphones on just to see if I can hear. You know what? I got a fan blowing on me over here because it's, believe it or not, where most of the country is air static. Yeah, that's my fan. Let me just turn it away a little bit. I think that's just my fan blowing on me. Tell me if it stops now. Did that make it quiet? It does. Yeah, I think it was my fan that you heard, because you know, with all these lights and this computer and all these monitors, it gets warm in here. So okay, good. So it's just the fan. Well, since this isn't professional show business, I'm gonna put the fan back on so I don't die in here. I'll put it on low, and I think maybe my lavalier mic picks it up a little better. A little better than that thing, but I'm going to be moving around in and out of the fan anyway. So here it is, guys. If any of you've been watching this little adventure so far, let's see. I want this. There it is, and wait, I'll put myself in it. That's not what I want. Sorry. Okay. I redid my whole studio so I could get cameras on this thing from different angles and everything. And I got my green screen all folded up, so there'll be no green screen trickery tonight. That's. But I want to be able to show everybody the airplane and go over what I did. I think it was a little ambitious of me to think that I could actually build this whole thing on a live build, because it just took a lot of hours. There's just a lot of technology in this thing. The actual airframe itself came with no instructions, and you know, I have a background in RC models, and that helped, but still had to stop and figure a lot of things out. And I wanted to go carefully with it. And tonight, what I want to do is I'm going to just show you guys what it looks like, and then if it doesn't bore you all to death, we'll go through the INAV programming and setup. which is almost done. And it's kind of like a learn as you go thing for me. I have Betaflight pretty well figured out, and INAV is kind of like that, but there's an awful lot of other little things, and I've been watching every video I can and reading the INAV wiki, which explains everything, but sometimes doesn't give me the answers that I want either. So it is just about ready at this point to test fly. Joe, you asked me which camera is that? You talking about the FPV camera on the airplane? It's a that camera is a run cam. I think it's a Micro Swift or something like that. On the drone. On what drone? It's on the plane. Yeah, it's a run cam. I'll show you. Let me. I got some pictures here. Why don't I do this? Why don't I go over to these pictures here, and I shot them today of the airplane, and there'll be some close-ups of some of the different things. There's the camera, and the mount is a tilt and swivel mount that I 3D printed and got the files from Thingiverse, and they were put up there by my Bonafide Pirate is the channel's name, and he's the guy that kind of inspired me to build this airplane, and he came up with these things. Now I do want to put a Cadex Tarsier in there, a dual camera that has an FPV camera on the bottom and the high def camera on top. I had one, and it wasn't working, and I had to RMA it, and of course they're out of stock, so I'm waiting for that, and I'll swap that out when I get it back. And that uses a little different mount because it has some little circuit boards that go with it, with the DVR and the SD card holder and all that, and that'll just kind of hang behind the camera. So I'll replace that. It'll be very easy to replace because the whole thing just plugs in with servo light connectors into a harness that comes underneath that canopy that needs to be removable. And I'll show you some of these things. We're going to fire up the airplane and get all this stuff working, all the servos. This is at that point I hadn't covered up the servos in the rear yet, but I have since done that. There's a front view of it. I just walked around, took some different pictures. The red hump on top is the GPS antenna, and behind that is the video transmitter antenna. Not a bad looking airplane, got kind of a Coast Guard feel to it with the colors, but I wasn't in any, I didn't feel like doing any custom paint jobs on it, so it came with these sticky decal things, and I just stuck them on. I kind of like the look of it. This is what you see when you open the top hatch between the wings. Little, pardon the blurry photograph, but I got that sharp there. It got a little sharper right there. There's the flight controller buried down in there, and I'm telling you, there are a lot of wires in this thing. I tried to keep it as neat as I could, but you can see that there's 5 or 6 wires coming out of each wing. You've got the blinky lights, the landing gear lights. You've got the motor control, the flap servo, the aileron servo, and the power plug for the ESC to spin the motors and all that stuff. This is not the kind of airplane that you want to take apart to transport, because it'll take you 15 minutes or half an hour to replug everything in again. Fortunately, I think it's small enough to fit on its nose in the back seat of my car, and that's how it's going to ride around. I may have to trade in my car on an SUV if I keep building these airplanes like this. But these are some of the wiring. If you look at the blue, you see the blue flight controller board, and all those S6, S7, S8, S9, S10. Those are different control channels on the flight controller that you then map to the different servos that go out. There's also 4 servos plugged into the receiver, as well as the bunch of wires plugged into the controller, because you got so many different channels. You have about 4 or 5 different control channels for the different flight modes and arming, and you have pan and tilt channels on the camera. You need a channel to work the lights, flaps, aileron, elevators. It's probably got a grand total of about 13 or 14 channels used of the 16 available. So a lot of wiring. This is underneath the canopy, the little harness that runs to the camera, and you see there's one of the things says tilt on it, and there's plugs and connectors for everything, so I can take that off of there if I really have to. And then you just lay the canopy with the camera up on top of the wing while you deal with the battery and everything else. There's another shot of the camera from the other side. That thing behind the camera, the little black square thing sitting on the circuit board, is an pitot, an airspeed sensor. And it, you see the pitot tube sticking out the front there in front of the camera. And I thought that might be the best place to mount it on the airplane, because it is sticking out in the airflow. I thought about the wing sticking out the side of the fuselage, but that seemed to be the simplest place to put it. And you see the rubber air tubes go from the pitot tube on back to the sensor, which then has 3 wires, power and signal, that go back to the flight controller, and it works really cool. I fire up the monitor of the on-screen display and blow in front of the airplane, and you can see it says I'm doing about 15 miles an hour, which is pretty cool, sitting still. Maybe if I was more of a blowhard, I could go 20 or 30 miles an hour, but I was checking to see if it works. Tim Weaver, hello, how are you? Good to see you. Let's see, next picture. I think we're back. Yeah, there's the pitot tube. And you see up near the tip, there's a tiny little hole in the side, and that's the static port. I don't know how many of you know how a pitot tube works, but it's pitot and static, and that's why you have 2 hoses coming off the back of it. You have a static and pitot, and the pitot side, the pressure side, is a hole in the front of the pitot tube, and then those little holes around the side are the static, and between the 2 of them they can measure the difference in measure the airspeed. Bill Riffett, hello, how are you? These are the little LED lights that are part of the light kit that came with this thing, and that those wires have to run on the wing. Those are the wing tip lights. The other ones are the landing lights, and that's up at the top of the vertical stabilizer, and that one flashes. You saw in the beginning of this thing, maybe you didn't see the beginning of it, but I'll kind of show you what it looks like all lit up at night. There's the tail, and I think that's it. Hang on one second here. That's what it looks like with everything going. Now I shot that last night and finished building it today. So you notice there's no decals on it yet. There were no covers over the lights. I've been a busy boy. I mean, I have pretty much morning till night for 2 or 3 days working on this thing to try to get it to the point where I can go out and fly it. And then unfortunately we're getting a cold front come through, a lot of wind and everything. It may not be till Friday that the weather's good enough. And of course, for the first flight, I do want good weather. But that's, I'll show you. I'm going to fire up the airplane and show you all the systems. Looks like a Christmas tree. The light that's blinking on the GPS back there, that actually shows through the red 3D printed housing, tells you you actually have a 3D fix, a satellite lock on enough satellites to get a precision enough fix to use the autopilot and return to home on this thing. There's a little light on the pitot tube sensor. At any rate, that's what it looked like. Lightened up my studio last night. My studio / workshop. Okay. A lot of wires. Oh man, there are a lot of wires. Video is good. Never lost signal, but I do keep losing audio. It keeps popping in and out. Maybe on my end. Are you talking about my audio on the stream here? Bob, is anybody else having a problem hearing me? It might be that fan blowing on me, but if you do, let me know. It may be this plug that's in this wireless mic. Let me make sure it's plugged in okay. Appears to be. Let me know if it's still a problem. I've got another mic here, but it's not wireless. It's not going to move around with me. Anybody like to come in and keep me company here and on the panel? You're welcome. I'm actually going to go ahead and post a link here in the chat, and don't usually get too many takers. But if anybody'd like to come in here, talk to me, ask questions, be on the show, be my guest. Love to have you. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do right now is, let's see, let me set it up to get this thing all fired up over here. So we'll go over to this picture here, and what I'm going to do is, we got this thing here. Oh, make sure play to the right camera. There it is. This is a monitor that will show me and you what the goggles display is going to look like on this thing. And then, of course, if I keep the lens cap on the camera, you'll see the on-screen display information on a black screen. So let me fire this puppy up here, and we'll get that going. And I have another camera that I might be able to dedicate to this, so I haven't tried to set this up. So if you guys would bear with me a second, and let's see if I can come up with a way to make this work here. All right, you guys are going to have to just bear with me, and I'm going to go into this camera here, and I'm going to try to fix it so it actually shows this. Right now all it's on it is static, but let's see if we can, whoops, fell over. This is professional show business, guys. Professional show business. All right, there we go. All right, so we got that. And now get the radio here, and I'll turn it on. Okay, now the way this airplane works is this hatch pops off, and that's where all the electronics are in there, and it's kind of neat. And it's got these super strong magnets that really snap in there in place. The whole canopy comes up like this, and I usually just lay it up there when I want to plug in the battery. So let me plug in the battery. Now, in case you're worried, the props are not tight, they're just loose. If the motors spin up, it's not going to kill me. But I'm not going to arm it. Okay, so once the battery's plugged in, what I want to try to do is bear with me 1 second here while I create a scene that has the on-screen display. Oh, it's fuzzy, it's not focused. This may work, it may not work. I'm seeing a reflection in the yeah, it's not it's too close to this camera here. Let's see. Bear with me, guys. Sorry about this. This is what I'm seeing, unfortunately, and I don't guess I'm going to be able to show you too much of that, but Bill says he hears you fine, so I don't know what the deal is. I hear you, but it pops in and out. It might be this wireless mic, guys. Let me know if it just disappears completely. If for some reason the sound just goes away, I'll go over to this other mic and you'll hear me, but it'll be a lot of ambient room noise. Okay, at any rate, what I wanted to show you here was if you look at that on-screen display, you see it's got the artificial horizon there, and if I come over here to the airplane and pick the nose up, you can see the horizon line goes down. If I pick the tail up, and if I bank the airplane left and right, so that actually shows me the exact horizon line of the airplane in the goggles when it's flying. Some of the other information I have in there is, let me get a pointer and I'll show you what that tells me. It's kind of a pretty neat setup, a little more complex than you normally use with a drone, unless it's a DJI drone. But this is what it shows me here. This is the name of the model, the battery voltage, the signal strength. This is the total milliamp hours of current used. Manual is the mode that I'm in. This is going to be, what is this? Oh, current draw, I think. It's got no numbers on it right now. This is the receiver, the transmitter channel and power level. 99% is the battery, the amount of battery I have left. This 99 is the RSSI, the amount of time that it's turned on. This is the altitude, and it's got a barometric sensor in it, so it's measuring real altitude. And also I have two airspeeds here. I have the airspeed from the pitot tube in the front, and then the GPS speed as well. There's a GPS altitude available I might throw on there. This message is telling me that it hasn't established a fix yet, so it's unable to arm. Then over here I've got my throttle position. There's going to be an arrow here that points to home, but there's no GPS yet. The distance from home and the number of satellites. So it just picked up 6 satellites, but the red light's not blinking yet in the GPS. So all that information that's on that display is overlaid on top of. I'm going to take the lens cap off the camera here. So it's kind of bright and all, but that's what the camera sees. Okay, so that takes care of what I'm going to see in the goggles, and that didn't work out as beautifully as I had hoped it would, as far as the quality of what I'm putting out there. But if I was going to do this every day, I'd have all the equipment and have the studio all set up to do this. But I think this is a one-shot kind of deal. All right, so what we have here, and I want to try to show you. Can you see the radio in this shot? I'll hold it up like this. See if I get over here. Can you guys hear me okay? I guess. At any rate, if you look at the camera on the front, this little thing on the side of the radio here tilts it up and down. I think I can actually zoom in on that. There. So you can see the camera's tilting up and down, and that's this slider, that's this control on the side of the radio over here. Then this knob right here controls the side-to-side pan of the camera. So I can pan it, and this is only a 90-degree servo. I've ordered a 180-degree servo, so it'll be able to look just pass sideways, and it'll actually be able to look back at the motors as you're flying, which is really pretty cool. The other side lever on the other side is the control for the lights. So if I push it up halfway, I get my navigation lights, which are the wingtip lights and the flashing light in the tail. So I have a red and a green light in the wingtips. There, give it a show. Got a red, and then if I click that switch into the second position, I get landing lights too. And those things are pretty bright. It actually caused the camera to stop down. So I can control the lights, landing lights, turn those off as well, which is kind of cool. To me, you know, if you're building models, this is what makes models kind of fun, having these gadgety things on there. All right, so let's turn my lights back on. It has, of course, all the standard controls. Elevator, you can see on the back. Ailerons on the wings. I don't know if you can see the flaps, but spin this around so you can see the back of the airplane. It's got flaps on the wings, 2 notches of flaps. There's your aileron, rudder on the back, and it's got steerable nose wheel coupled to the rudder as well. And if I arm it and hit the throttle, you hear the motor spin up. Of course, the props aren't hooked up. So that's the model right there, and it came out pretty nice looking. I mean, underneath, you can see those 3D printed ventilation covers, those red covers right here. that I printed up and mounted for the ESCs to help keep them cool. All the wiring for the lights runs in channels all along the wing and through the bottom of the nacelle, and then it goes around through here, and it all goes into there. There's a little black mark, you can't see it there, but this is where the center of gravity is. And you achieve the center of gravity by moving the battery can slide all the way back underneath the equipment bay if it has to, if you use a big battery. Down on the bottom, it's got another one of those magnetic hatches, and in there is the actual receiver and the video transmitter on the side there. So that's in there, and then in the top part here is where you saw the photograph. So that is where the flight controller and all the electronics and everything else was up. And it's just solid. It's just solid wires. But it was a fun project. And the next thing I want to do right now is hook it up to the computer. And that's done by plugging a serial port into the flight control, a serial micro USB cable into the flight controller. Okay, and I'm going to open up INAV. But let me take a second right here and just see what's going on. See who we got in here and say hello. All right. Let's see who I missed. We have, quite a few people came in. Drone Life RC, how you doing? And Drone Shots. Jody. How you doing, buddy? Kiwi. There you are. It's going in show support. I don't know if this is the greatest of streams, but I know there were a few people following me along on this, not too many, and I felt like I really wanted to show you guys the progress. I'm going to film the flying and the fine-tuning of it down the road, because this INAV has turned out to be fairly complex, and I think it's quite a learning curve in it. I don't profess to be able to teach it to anybody yet, but I am getting it figured out. Anyway, Greg, thanks for coming in. Appreciate that. So let me go over to INAV over here, and I'll show you what's going on. There we go. See, this is the difference. When I have a green screen, all that crap behind me is gone, and you just see me in the bottom. But now you got the whole square there, so I think it's probably better if you don't see me. So we'll just get me out of there, and I'll show you. So what this told me up here is that it did find, you're hearing more static too. All right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch mics to this mic. That ought to be better. What do you think? Is that better? Because I'm sitting at the table, and I don't think I'm going to be. I'm not going to be moving around too much. So we'll use my regular studio mic. Yeah, it's the fan that you hear, I'm sure, but this mic ought to be better. That little lavalier mic. Let me get rid of that here. Get rid of this thing. This is what it is here, and it works great when there's no fan, but it really is this little gizmo right here. It really is sensitive to noise. It's omnidirectional. It's not, and it's supposed to be. But I could turn off the fan, but what fun would that be? All right, get everything in place here. There we go. Turn off this. And then the other half of it is a receiver. You know, technology's great, but sometimes it just doesn't work out like you want it to. I suppose, I hate to, you know, it's supposed to get down into the, I know you guys are going to hate me for this, but we're going to be freezing here tonight. It's going to get all the way down into the 60s probably. I know that sounds crazy. I mean, it was 65 this morning, and it was the first cool morning that we had. I'm going to turn this thing on so I can see what it's doing, and I may end up holding it up because it still is turned on and it's still broadcasted. So I guess this is a pretty good little shakedown for it to make sure that it stays working. And it says that I have 9 satellites and I'm inside the house. So how good is that? That's pretty good. All right, let's go over to INAV, and it says that so we'll connect to INAV. Now, the first thing it does is it shows you this big graphical block, and on Betaflight that's a drone, but on this it's an airplane. And as I move the airplane around, it turns it around, and if I lift it up and tilts, and the first thing you do is make sure that everything's moving in the right direction when you first plug the flight controller in. And then once you got that moving correctly, there's a whole checklist of stuff down the right here. UAV is leveled, runtime calibration, CPU load, all the different steps that it took to boot up. And I got a whole bunch of green arrows, so evidently that's okay right now. And over here on the left-hand side are all the different pages and different things that you can do with INAV. Now, the radio itself is not a real big part in the setup of this thing because INAV will fly the airplane. It will fly the airplane for you unless you got something set up where something's reversed. So the basic radio setup on your basic 4 flight channels, throttle, rudder, aileron, and elevator, need to be just straight out of the box. And we'll talk about that when we get down to the receiver tab. But anyway, the first step when you plug in this flight controller is to calibrate it. And I did this outside of the airplane. And unlike the accelerometer calibration in a drone where you just do it one shot, this has got 6 different ways that it needs to know. Right side up, upside down, and on each of the 4 sides. And as you do it, it processes it and turns these things blue and tells you that your calibration succeeded, and that's all there is to that page. Then you go on to the next step. The next step is probably the trickiest step in setting up INAV, and that's where it decides what servos get their directions from what radio channels and on what pins on the flight controller board does that signal get outputted to. And there is a way that you can just tell it it's an airplane and say load and apply, but I have a more complicated setup than just the basic airplane because I've got the camera controls in there, I've got the flaps, I've got all kinds of other things. So I did this manually. And it has 2 sections. It has a motor mixer and a servo mixer. Inactivity alarm. That's my radio saying I haven't done anything in a while. and that's pretty handy actually, because I'd be working in here and forget to turn the radio off, and I'd be in the other room and I hear some woman in here yelling something about inactivity, and I don't have to even take that personally, not being married, you know. I mean, if you've got women yelling inactivity at you, that's a problem. But this one, I could just shut her off. Okay, so anyway, this page, and I'm not going to give you a lesson on how to do this, but basically, I have 6 different servos or channels I need to deal with. The basic, the 3 basic controls of the airplane: roll, pitch, and yaw. The throttle is handled up here separately, and then I needed one more channel going through the flight controller to control the lighting control box. So I set up a channel on my transmitter, just channel 13. Holy shit, you guys are talking about the temperatures. This is why I live in Florida. But it's going to be windy. We got that cold front that's killed all of you is coming here in a day or so. So we're going to get it, and this one isn't going to stall out like all the other ones have so far. We're ready for the first blast through here. At any rate, I told it what you do is you say add a servo, and you give it an arbitrary number here from 0 to 7. This will handle 8 different channels, and then you tell it what it is. Is it a stabilized yaw? Tells the flight controller that it's the roll channel, but its output comes from the autopilot. If I just put a direct out here from the radio, then it would bypass the autopilot completely. And this RC channel 13 is just the channel that I've assigned that slide switch on the side that turns the lights on and off. And so I said RC channel 13 is servo 5. Then what this thing does is it gives you this row up at the top here that tells you what outputs on the flight controller, which has S1, S2 through S10 across. You saw those where all the servos are plugged in. It tells you which one of these numbers gets plugged into which one of these, and the 2 of them don't match. It's just a mapping, and you have to plug it in that way. So this tells me that this servo that I arbitrarily numbered 5, which is my light control, is going to be coming out of S8 on the flight controller board. So when it came time for me to plug the little box that works the lights into the flight controller, I plugged it into S8. So to try to make a long story short, channel 13 on my radio, which says RC channel 13 here, works what I've arbitrarily assigned a number 5 in the servo mixer. The servo mixer does its thing and then tells me that if I want to find the output of servo 5, I need to go to switch to S8 on the flight controller. So what started as channel 13 intermediately became servo number 5 is then translated into 8 on the flight controller. So if you think that was obvious to figure out how that worked, but once I got the hang of it, it became very, very, very clear, very easy to understand. The only thing you got to be careful of is it assigns these pins, these output pins on the flight controller dynamically every time you boot up the model. So if I go in here and change any of these servo numbers and stick something in between, maybe this is going to change. So you got it. Once you set it up, you got to be very careful, because then everything will be, you'll have all these things plugged in inside the airplane and it'll all be plugged in wrong. So try to make, I had to make sure we got that set up. But that's called the mixer. Now, another thing I can do in the mixer is adjust the throws. And down here for my elevator, I've got it set to 75 because I just had way too much elevator. If I turn down the throws in the radio, the autopilot won't know that I turned the throws down. So the key is don't touch the radio. Make your changes in the mixer, the servo mixer in INAV. So it's not a simple thing to grasp the concept. But once you grasp the concept and that little light goes off and the epiphany happens, uh, then I can then and you understand it. Then from there on out, it becomes pretty straightforward. You wonder how you ever didn't understand it. Then you can verify in the next tab once you have your mixer set up. You go to outputs, and what this tab does is it'll actually show you what every one of these channels is doing. So if I move the ailerons, you can see the output. And what happened was, even though we'll get to the radio setup in a minute, but even though the radio was set up right, the aileron servos were moving backwards, which is easy to happen because they can mount this way or mount upside down, and but both the aileron servos are moving in the wrong direction. Now the inclination is to go into the radio and reverse it, but you can't do that because then your INAV will be all screwed up. You make all your changes in INAV, and there's a button over here that says reverse. So I reversed both of the aileron servos, and now when I move it, the servos move in the right direction. Then elevator, I didn't have to reverse that. That one was okay. The rudder I had to reverse, but the nose wheel I didn't. So this one here, this servo 3 is the rudder. Servo 4 is the nose wheel. So I had the rudder go one way, the nose wheel going the other way. So I had to reverse, and everything, the final upshot of it is everything is working in the right direction now. And then number 5 here is the lights. So when I move that to the center position, it turns on the wingtip, the navigation lights, and then when I turn it all the way up, it actually turns on the landing lights too. So this tells me, and I can actually watch what happens to the outputs as I move the different sticks on my radio. The motor, I can even check them out, but with these things you have to tell it because it might have props on it, that you understand the risk, and I'm not going to fire it up, but you can do the motors. Now, we'll see when it flies, but I've got a twin engine, and sometimes with different twin engines, you have to synchronize the motors. One might be running faster than the other. But since each of these motors has its own channel output from the flight controller, I can actually create a mix that allows me to use one of these knobs up on top of the radio to synchronize the motors, to slow one of them down or speed it up a little bit and leave the other one the same. I may do that, I may not, but that's having two separate motors and two separate control channels from the controller allows you to do stuff like that, which you could do anything with it. You could actually even cause the motors to go differential when you added rudder. I don't know why you do that, but you could. So depending on how crazy you want to make these different mixes, you can do all that. INAV also has PIDs, just like Betaflight, because it is a servo mechanism and it has PID loops, and it has just as many settings, and it has filtering, and it has all that other stuff. And they give you a head start here with this tab called presets. And basically what you do is you just tell it what you got here. You got a 5-inch racer, a 7-inch indoor, 7-inch freestyle, 10-inch airplane general. And then you hit apply, and it sets the PIDs to where the developers think is a good start, a good close. Seek split. How you doing, my friend? It says, what's that website? No, that's not a website. That if you're looking at what's on my screen, that's the INAV configurator to configure the flight controller on this airplane that's sitting behind me right there, that I can turn the lights on. I think my favorite thing about this are the lights. I've always been a gadget nut. All right, where were we? So, is this like watching paint dry, guys? Am I losing you, or are you still here? No, we still got a half a dozen people. Well, let me get through this. So I set it to general airplane, and we'll see how that works. The next thing is just like Betaflight, is that all these different peripherals and everything have to hook up to the flight controller board. Your receiver, your GPS module, your airspeed, your not your airspeed. That actually goes through a channel in the radio, but this thing has got a ton of UARTs. And usually when you build one of these things, you're usually short on them. But I have run cam camera control, so I can actually go into the camera and change the settings using my transmitter sticks and my goggles to show me what's going on as far as changing white balance and brightness and all the other camera type goodies. I've got smart port telemetry, which sends the telemetry information not just to in the goggles, but also sends it back to the radio. All the GPS information, different voltages, temperatures, everything. The radio has that, and I can actually set that up in the radio to trigger different voice alerts. For example, I can when I switch the mode from manual mode, which basically you have full control of the airplane, the flight controller is doing nothing. It's a complete pass through of the controls, and that's where you can fly the airplane and with no interference. So if something, when you're on the first flight, for example, I'm not going to use the goggles. I'm not going to use the INAV controller. I'm going to put it in manual mode and pass-through mode and fly it like there was no such thing. There was no autopilot in it, and just have full control over the airplane. Because until you get it to a point where you're confident and you know that the autopilot isn't fighting the airplane. In other words, maybe the airplane has a terrible left roll in it that you need to trim out. Well, the autopilot will try to fly at level, but it's going to be fighting that out of trim condition. So the ideal way to start first flight is to just go out there and fly the airplane, line of sight, like you fly any RC airplane, get it all trimmed up. And then there are some ways to automatically set what, in your radio, it is an auto trim type feature, which changes the midpoints of each of the channels to what trim you had, recenters the trims, and then that becomes where the airplane is trimmed. And then INAV doesn't have to fight it. The airplane is trimmed up right out of the box. Then there's some functions in INAV which are pretty cool. They have one called Auto Tune, and that's for all the PIDs and those different things. And you hook the mode to a switch, and when you're flying around, you turn on Auto Tune and just ring it out. They say do a lot of fast rolls and jerks and up and down and sharp turns and all kinds of things. And the flight controller actually figures out what it needs to tune itself. And I'll get to that maybe on the fourth or fifth flight, but first thing I need to do is just make sure the airplane flies. And all these different UARTs are places where any serial, it's like a USB port basically, but they all have numbers. The receiver hooks to UART 6. Where's the GPS? The GPS is on UART 2. I used all of the recommended UART numbers in the diagram for this particular flight controller, and why not? Because the way they had the pins laid out on the board, for example, you want to have what they call smart audio, so you can change the settings in your radio transmitter through your goggles in your radio by making certain stick movements. That has to have a UART too. Well, it just so happens that on the board, the 3 pins that go to the video transmitter, the ground, power, and signal, right next to that is TX3. So that's the obvious choice, TX3. Or was it TX3 or a TX6 on this one? No, it was UART 8, TX8 they had on there. So I could use a 4-wide plug, and so why would I use any other transmitter connection if they stick one conveniently right next to where you need it? So that I did follow all that. Anyway, that's could be a little confusing, but got all that done. The next tab here is configuration, and I don't want to go through all of this stuff, but just showing you how complex this is. And I have got to go over this before I fly the airplane with the flight controller involved. Every single one of these things, I need to make sure I understand what they do. Now you have fail-safe in this thing. This thing has returned to home, and it'll fly back to the home point, and then it'll fly a circle. They do what they call loiter. So fail-safe is when the airplane loses the signal from your radio. If something happens, you either fly it out of range or something fails. And so this thing is going to be smart enough to turn around and fly home. Hopefully you'll get your signal back, but eventually what will happen is it'll just run out of battery, and it's designed to try as hard as it can to land. In other words, not just come crashing down on the ground, but maintain a certain glide path. You could glide into a tree, but chances are when you do have a fail-safe, most of the time, as soon as the airplane gets a little closer to you, you get your signal back. Now this has got a long-range R9 Frsky long-range system in it, which should be good for over 10 kilometers. So I'm more than likely going to lose the video to the goggles long before I'd ever lose the signal controlling the airplane. And if that happens, and all of a sudden you're flying and it's out there a couple miles and you can't see anymore, you just click the switch on your radio that is set to the return to home mode, and the airplane will fly back. And as it's coming back, you probably get your goggles back. And if you don't ever get your goggles back, you'll see the airplane will be flying circles over your head. You just turn off the autopilot and land it. So it helps to be an RC pilot with the ability to fly one of these airplanes line of sight a lot more than FPV drones. There's an awful lot of guys that fly FPV drones that are fabulous in the goggles, but can't fly the thing line of sight. Drones are very hard to fly line of sight anyway, because you don't know what, it's hard to see where the front of the thing is. With an airplane, at least, it's got a distinct shape. You can always tell. If you can see it, you can pretty well determine which is the front and which is the back. What are you guys talking about? Temperature. Oh, yeah, the DJ 1200 mil. I saw that. I'm going to wait a little while. I did the firmware upgrade that DJI put out on my goggles that actually adds 200 and 500 in there to the things, but I didn't want to do that SD card trick to jump it to 1200 because there may be a reason that's not ready for prime time yet, and it might overheat something or burn something out. So they may not be quite ready for that. And I don't need it. And I don't fly my drones that far. On 700 milliwatts, that thing's got plenty more range than I need. All right, so this, you set your fail-safe up here. This is your PID tuning, which is like Betaflight. Then they have an advanced tuning page, and of all these other settings that where you set return to home altitude, and everything is in centimeters, which makes it really great. So 3,000 centimeters is 30 meters, which is almost 100 feet. So climb before return to home, I have that turned on. Land after return to home, only on fail-safe. That means if I lose the receiver signal, it will try to glide in somewhere, and then after it stops, it actually will shut the motors off. They have a vertical speed, all this different settings, and I have to fine tune all that as well. You've got all kinds of throttle setting. I mean, you could tune this thing till the cows come home, but you got to have a starting place. So we'll do that. Then the receiver tab is basically just like Betaflight. You got to make sure that when you push the throttle up, it goes up. When you move the rudder to the right, it goes to the right. When you push the elevator forward, it goes up. When you push the aileron to the right, it goes up. You can't have any of these things reversed. They have to work just like that. All the rest of these things are just different switches Here's the, I told you on channel 13, that purple one there is where I set for the light control. So when I move the light control, you see channel 13 moves. So the first thing you do when you're setting it up is you pick a radio channel and you go into the mixer, you assign a particular switch to that channel. Then you go into the flight controller, create a servo, assign, you know, what I went through before. So it's a process that that requires that you keep track of what you're doing, and I did that. I have a listing here of everything, what it's mapped to, what it ended up on, what pin it is, and all that. And then I actually drew a, because there's so many switches on this radio, and until I really become familiar with what they all do, I even made myself a diagram of what switches do what. Now I've tried to conform to the same standards I use for the drone. In other words, this is the arm switch here, this is the main mode switch here, but I've got secondary mode switches for altitude hold, course lock, all that. I have auto tune, I have many other functions that you don't have with drones. So I do remember the basics, and if something should happen, I know that if I push this switch up all the way, it's going to put me back in manual or pass-through mode, not just fly the airplane. All else fails. Click that. I know if I pull this switch down all the way, and I may change it to make the mode switch down all the way, but it'll go into automatically return to home. So those are the most important things that I need to be able to get to without having to think too much. And then after receiver tab is the old modes tab, and this is where you assign arming mode. You tell it what switch it is. You tell, and when I move that switch, this little blue thing moves, and I can move this to where I want it. So when it's inside of this range, it'll actually do that. The mode switch, horizon mode, is the mode that they recommend that you actually fly in if you want to fly in a stabilized mode. Horizon mode, when I move the mode switch, and this actually lights up to tell you that that's active. But when I move this switch to the third position, I think I have that set to return to home. Yeah, there it is right there. Now, since it's not flying, return to home won't arm, but you can see that I already did make that change. So in the first position on this mode switch, it's manual mode, and there's a mode for that too. So there it is, manual mode. When I click it to the center position, it comes out of manual mode and it triggers horizon mode. When I go into the third position, it goes and triggers return to home. So that's how you can set any position of any switch to do anything. And this has arm, angle, horizon, turn assist, head free, head adjust. I think that's for head tracker, FPV angle mix, camera stabilizer switch for that. It has nav position hold that'll cause it to just circle wherever it is. Now, you know, you have to decide. You can't use them all, so you have to decide which modes you think might be useful to you. I may do that. And then there's another one called loiter change, and then nav return to home, nav waypoint. This thing will fly waypoints. It'll fly missions just like you can program them in there. Home reset tells the airplane that forget the old home point. This is your new home point. Some of these I don't even know what they are. Nav cruise basically will just hold your heading, I guess. Each one of these things has a page in the wiki that describes all the different modes. Nav launches are cool, and that basically, if you're hand launching your model, it actually allows you to grab onto it and hold onto it without the motor running, and then the minute you heave it, the motor starts and it goes into stabilized mode and goes into a climb and climbs out. So that's an interesting one. Auto tune, flapperons, beeper, on-screen display. It just goes on and on and on. Any of these modes can be set to any of the switches and channels on the radios that you want. And I'm starting out with just these basic ones. To be able to fly it manually, to be able to fly stabilized, and to have the return to home working. And then from there, we'll explore. I think the interesting thing about this is that I'm probably never going to stop playing with it or trying new things with it until it crashes, I guess. At any rate, then you got your GPS tab, and there's a mission control tab, and this is where you would actually go in and program missions and waypoints, and you have the maps. The on-screen display is where you can go in and set up what you're seeing on your screen, and all of these different things that you see around the outside here are different types of information you can show on your on-screen display. Of course, you got to temper some of that with how much room you have. But this is where I can adjust and move things around on the on-screen display to show up in the goggles. You can put LED strips on this thing and program the colors and flashes and everything else. This shows you your different sensor inputs. There's your barometer. If I were to go back and pick the airplane up 3 feet, this little line would go up. If I blow into the airspeed indicator, this one would change. You can see just the air moving in the room is fluctuating that one around. But this actually is a way to check to see if your sensors are working. And then it has black box logging and all that. The CLI is a command line interface where you can type commands. You can see what commands you have. You know, just like Betaflight. If I say get GPS, it gets me all the.
Sensor lost.
Okay, it evidently it lost my sensor while I did that. So. At any rate, I think that's enough of that. It would probably take 3 hours or 4 hours to go through every one of those settings and have a discussion about it. And I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube, listening to some of these guys who are, you know, the Joshua Bardwell types that dive into every single little setting and possibility and all the different things and ramifications. One of the guys, a guy named Pavel Spakowski, I think is his name, is actually on the development team for INAV, and he gets very technical too. Did you see Joshua smoke his and still work? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, Joshua smoke his. Oh, I saw that. Yeah, I saw it. He was trying to use a metal tweezers to push the. He was trying to use the metal tweezers to push the bind button in, and he shorted it out against something. But when he played the replay slow, it looked like this. It didn't come out of the. It looked like he shorted something next to it. It didn't look like the flame shot out of the air unit. Hard to tell what he did, but yeah, that was funny. Anyway, guys, I could be boring the hell out of you with this. I just wanted you to see the progress on this thing, and then the next time we'll go out and we'll fly it. We'll see how well it works at a time. For right now, let me turn it off. So bear with me. Let me unplug the. I don't have that wired mic on me, so it's going to get a little funky. This thing's been sitting here running for quite a while, and which is a good test to me, a good shakedown for it. Let me unplug plug the battery. It seemed to keep working, which is good.
Telemetry lost.
And that's what the radio tells you when the receiver goes away, that the telemetry is gone. I just found the little foamy thing from my microphone. It fell off. And now we can just shut the radio off. Here we go. So it seems to be working pretty good. And I have it set right now to where it should fly pretty good. It should fly. We'll see. I'm going to put the old GoPro on the head trick when I fly it, or maybe I can even take my video camera out there with a zoom lens and find somebody that knows how to work it good enough to follow one of these airplanes through the air and get some good shots of it flying. And I'm going to fly it the first flight line of sight as if it were just an RC airplane with no automatic anything. But I will be recording the DVR in the goggles, so I can go back and look at what was going on in the on the on-screen display while I was flying, and then I'll probably make the video of that flight and overlay the on-screen display on top of the actual video and the camera and on-screen display on top of the flight that I shoot through the GoPro. And I think that it ought to be interesting. And if the thing takes off and doesn't need much trim, it's going to have a really long flight time on these big batteries I'm putting in here. I'll probably click that switch into stabilized mode, see what happens. And if that works okay, I'll keep pushing it. And who knows, I may end up ringing the whole thing out through the first flight. And if it's still working and still flying, I will put it in return to home, where it turns back, comes back to me, and starts flying circles over my head around my position. And at that point, I can let go of everything because it's on full autopilot, and I can put the goggles on at that point and fly through the goggles. So that's another neat thing about it. Kind of like a Mavic is you can put that thing up and hover it and just go out and have lunch. Come back, it'll be right where assuming you haven't run the battery down, it'll be right where you left it. So this thing does will do that same thing. It'll hold altitude and hold position, and it's not going to come to a stop like a drone does, but it'll fly around in circles, and I give you a chance to grab a sandwich or. It's good to put the goggles on or take the goggles off. You just, it's like you park the drone up there. You park the airplane up there. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to these fields where I'm flying are out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm looking forward to stretching it out a little bit, see if I, can't go out and do some sightseeing with the thing. Especially once I get the Frsky R9 camera mounted on it, where I've got good high-def stuff. So guys, I think since we're down to like 3 of us now, Jody, you, me, and who else? I don't know. I think I bored the hell out of everybody. So we'll have to do something. I have to do something with some action in it, and I also have to get out and fly some drones a little bit too, because I'm not replacing the drones with the airplane. That's for sure. I love those drones. So guys, thanks for watching. Appreciate you coming in here for a short time. We won't drag this out any longer. And I'll do what I always do. I'll bring some music in. There we are. And give you guys all the rest of the day off. And go play with your drones or your airplanes too. And see you all Thursday night, where we won't be talking about INAV and all that crap. We'll just be doing our regular Thursday night thing. With that, turn it over to Spank, who's sitting there against a black background all by himself. But in the corner. Say goodnight, Spank. See you later, guys.